Hello, good evening, namaskar, and welcome to the October edition of the Humanity 2.0 Conversations, a space where we explore ideas, stories, and the voices that ask us to see the world a little differently. I'm your host, Prashanti Michaela, and today we are diving into a conversation that sits at the intersection of mythology, gender, and the human voice, quite literally. Humanity 2.0 was an initiative we started about 5 years ago as an event to spotlight authors, artists, thought leaders, and practitioners in these one on one conversations, which would explore and articulate issues and influence public discourse. The idea was to facilitate a point of confluence and dialogue for anyone who has perspectives or experiences related to justice, or actually the lack of it in various aspects of our society today. These conversations, we hope, would serve as prompts not just for dialogue, but concerted and definitive action. We, our team, the small team, we continue to nurse the hope that every effort, however small, will trigger a dramatic impetus in the fight for a more just world. My guest today is Utkarsh Patel, author, mythologist, and educator, whose work re examines India's epic narratives through a contemporary, inclusive lens. In this conversation, we'll talk about what happens when women speak and what happens when they are silenced, about how religion and tradition have shaped those silences, and what it might take to reclaim those voices today in homes, in workplaces, in faith, and in the public imagination. So stay with us as we journey into a story that is ancient, yes, but also startlingly urgent and contemporary as we discuss Utkarsh's book, Silencing Draupadi. Good evening and welcome, Utkarsh. Thank you so much for making time for us today and being a part of this conversation.
It's my pleasure, and thanks to you and your team for having me here.
It's wonderful. I'm already excited. As I mentioned in our conversation, I have gone through your book. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this conversation. So as we start, Utkarsh, maybe you could tell us, I always like to start at the beginning. So what drew you to reimagine Draupadi's story, and what were the questions you were trying to explore through your book, Silencing Draupadi?
You know, when you teach or study a subject like mythology and epics and the various facets of it, there are often things that strike you when you're looking for something else altogether. And one of the things that really came to my notice was how there were dichotomies in a character, and how a character often kind of contradicts her own self or himself, kind of goes against the grain of her personality. And that is something that suddenly strikes you saying, oh, I wonder why he or she didn't do this, because I would have expected that out of him or her.
Right, right.
With this kind of background, and also when you read different kind of cultures, you come across a lot of instances where you feel that this person could have said something. Did she? And that strikes off, as something that stands. And in numerous readings of mine, when I've come across so many instances of how a woman has been silenced, and that set me off to sort of research further and see, is this something very local? Is this something very regional? Is this something very culture specific? Or is it all pervasive? Or is it, like everywhere? And I think that's how it all started. When I realized that this is something that is all over. It's there in Greece, it's there in Egypt, Mesopotamia. All the ancient texts have somewhere or the other hinted at how a woman has been silenced, how a woman has been made to shut up. And that's not out of choice, that's more out of force. And I think that's how things led from one to the other. And I thought that, okay, it's time to sort of talk about it in the open.
Right, right. So in the many retellings of the Mahabharata, Draupadi's voice has been both powerful and I guess, contested, right? So what did you feel was missing in the traditional versions that you wanted to restore?
Well, that's the projection of Draupadi. She's strong, she's fiery, she's outspoken. She's somebody, who can't be stifled, and which is true in the popular narratives that we have come across. We've always seen her, sort of expressing herself, often quite loudly and vehemently. All that is fine. But when you look deeper, and that's the dichotomy I'm talking about here, is that she's somebody who speaks up very vocally at a place when nobody expected her to speak up. During the Swayamvar, she
Right.
actually stops Karna, saying,
Yes.
"Sorry, you cannot participate in this, or I'm not going to get married to you." And to speak up at that juncture, you
When so
really
many
needed
people
to
were
have
around. And I guess
exactly
mostly they were men, right?
all of them. There wasn't a single woman to sort of be by her side except her maids. To have the courage in yourself to speak up there, we won't get into the right and the wrongs of it, but she did. And that stands out. Also, when she's molested later on, she speaks up. Even in that disheveled condition, she still has some basic questions that she wants to ask to everybody set out there. A person like her, what made her suddenly not raise an iota of objection when she's being married to five men? That was something that didn't quite settle down well with me, by saying that somebody who's so vocal, somebody who wanted to get married to only Arjun because she was kind of in love with Arjun, what happened? That when everybody realizes that this was a simple mistake, a mother made by simply saying, "Go guys, share whatever you guys have got," and everybody sort of rallying behind that statement, she doesn't even raise an objection. Rather, it gives us a very wrong impression that maybe she wanted to marry five people. So something that goes against her character, something that she's been accused of all through in the entire epic. There are people who call her all sorts of names, and wasn't something that was very common. Why did she take it lying down? That
Right.
And why did she not raise even a voice to say, "Sorry, I'm not going to get married"?
Right.
Or did she? That's where I kind of am raising a question, saying, did
Right.
she? Because everybody rallies around. Yudhishthir gives his version, Vyas comes from somewhere and gives his version. Everybody's trying to justify a marriage which was not a norm,
Right.
right? It wasn't a practice at that point of time.
Right.
But she keeps quiet. That's where the story takes
You're,
off,
yes.
to say
Yes.
that, why did she keep quiet, or did she?
Did she? Well, that's very interesting. And when I was reading your book, Utkarsh, I actually, got to know a few things for the first time, because I hadn't, maybe even in all my readings, or, my understanding of the Mahabharata, I hadn't known two things. Number one is that later, all five of them actually married other women as well. I mean, so she was not the only wife that the Pandavas had. I mean, collectively, she was
True.
the only one. But then, of course, I got to know that she, and also I was not aware that she, all five of them had children with her.
Mm.
So those were two new things that I learned from your book about the Mahabharata. But for those of our audience members who are joining us just now, I'd like to again just say that we have started the conversation about Draupadi primarily because we are talking about Utkarsh's book, Silencing Draupadi. We're using the book as a peg to actually look at so many themes that Utkarsh has brought out through his book. And we are looking at Draupadi's very, very historical silence, or as Utkarsh says, was she silent on that particular really, really history changing event that had taken place when she was asked to marry all the five brothers, the Pandavas. So with that as the backdrop, um, so Utkarsh, we often see mythological women either idealized or vilified, right? So what does this tell us about how our culture, I mean, especially here in India, let's talk about our Indian culture, negotiates women's agency and moral power? I know you mentioned that, it's pretty much the same across cultures because you have done a lot of study. But then here right now, if you're talking about Draupadi and we're looking at our own culture, how does this tell us, how our cultures negotiates women's agency and moral power?
You know, when you look at the role of women in mythology, they're either a goddess or they are a demoness.
Right, right,
So that's and there isn't any other portrayal worth the mention. So she's either eulogized, okay, as a
right,
devi and something, or vilified, like
right,
you mentioned.
right.
This very clearly tells us who is telling the
The
story,
story.
who are the storytellers. And when you dig down deeper, inevitably the storytellers are bards, and these bards are men,
We will
right?
make
Now they have an agenda, or remember, every story, these are not just stories for entertainment. These are
right,
not stories for entertainment. These are your social texts. These are laying down, these are like charters. These are like expected lines of behavior. One
like a
is,
framework.
it's a framework, right? It's very clear. So these stories, and again, let's understand, were these stories read? No, these stories were never read. These stories were narrated, sometimes performed, sometimes narrated where, by who? By kathakars.
Right,
Where? Public performance, public places. So
right,
either they are temple courtyards or they are fields where a person comes and sort of narrates these. In all these stories, and at the end of it, what comes across is that a woman's role is to serve, is to be like
mm,
a shadow of the man and follow in his footsteps. And these aspects or these ideals were eulogized. These ideals were seen as, the foundation of a great civilization, of a strong civilization, where the woman is simply doing at the beck and call of the man, or,
right.
or, or, or the men of the family, right? And any good society to survive must have the women chaste, absolutely clear, one track, and
Unblemished.
unblemished, exactly. And often, despite the intelligence, and we've seen there are some sparks of intelligence, there'll be some stories, but let's say a woman is extremely intelligent. Despite that, the framework is still defined by patriarchy, right?
Right,
And that is a quality that has always been eulogized. Tell
right,
me something. How many times would you know women who are either called a Sita or a Maithili or a Vaidehi or Savitri? But how many women do you know who are called Draupadi and Panchali?
right,
Right? We don't name our daughters Draupadi and Panchali. She was a strong woman. She's an extremely fiery individual, but that's not the name I want by, because we don't want our women to be rebels of sorts, right?
right,
We want them submissive, we want them subservient, we want a nice Sita Savitri kind of a woman. And I think that's where we are, that this is, where is the agency? I mean, what are we talking about? Is there an agency at all? How many women or how many characters have spoken up, expressed their opinion? And if they have, we don't know much about them. For example, in Valmiki Ramayana, there's a very beautiful instance of Sita advising, and I'm using the word advising, Ram about, when they enter the forest.
right,
When they enter the forest, everybody keeps telling Ram, please come, there are these demons bothering us, etc., etc. And Ram goes, and then Sita makes him sit down and say, what are you doing? We are no more Kshatriyas. You're not a Kshatriya, you're an ascetic, and you're not following your ascetic dharma. And there's a very beautiful parable that she narrates. How many of us know the story? What happened to the story? The story in the later versions have been completely omitted, because we don't want a woman who's advising the man. You see, it
right,
goes against
right.
the character. So you see, even if certain authors have built it in, the subsequent retellings have forgotten. This is a very important part of the Valmiki Ramayana. How many? And whenever I tell this story to whoever I tell the story, nobody seems to know about it. Why? Because we've decided to overlook it. We've decided to silence that Sita who had an
Right,
opinion and who was an advisor to Ram.
right. I want to take this, really wonderful juncture in this conversation to actually quickly say that you have studied, scriptures from, different scriptures from different religions, and I wonder whether you have actually studied the Bible, where we actually have women heroes. And I would like to, actually highlight one story, and I'll say it in a very few words, where it is a queen, and her name was Esther, and she becomes instrumental in actually saving an entire community of people, and that's because she spoke up. And that book, is there included in the Bible, as is another very, women-centric book called Ruth, the Book of Ruth, where we have, again, a beautiful narrative of a woman whose story becomes very significant in the entire genealogy of, the birth of Jesus, And I'm so glad that we actually can say that there are at least, there may be more and there are more, but for the sake of this conversation, to say that there are women who are heroes. And so, like you were mentioning names, we have a lot of Ruths, we have a lot of Esthers, people who have been named after these heroic ladies whose accounts have been mentioned in the Bible. But to come back to your, the conversation about how in many other scriptures, maybe there is no mention of women actually having an agency, of women actually speaking up or taking a decisive action. Yes,
Let
please
me
tell.
let me just pause here before we
Right.
go further.
Yeah.
You're right about Ruth. You're right about Esther. Right? These are well-known names. These
Right.
are well-known stories, well documented. However, if you step out in the world and ask people that single character, who's made an impact, is it? Do people talk about Ruth and Esther? But they do talk about Eve's temptation. People remember what Eve did, for which so called mankind has suffered forever. We remember that, but we don't remember Ruth and Esther in general. I'm not saying somebody who's very strong in the faith would remember,
Right.
but you see, we remember Eve's, if I can use the word misdemeanor, though personally I don't think that's misdemeanor, but we won't get into that. I
Right.
mean, Eve's temptation is remembered, Esther and Ruth's is not. Similarly, we when there are many such characters across. My only way of looking at it is that how many of you remember them? How many of us remember these great characters? And are they great, or are they also having a reason why they are being eulogized? That is, something that you'll always have to remember. That again, at the end of the day, what is always significant is who is telling the story. When
Correct.
you dig that, and you will come to your answer, yourself.
Yes, and for a moment there, while you were mentioning Eve, I wanted to quote Shakespeare saying, the evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones.
Yeah.
So maybe people remember, like you were saying, maybe people mention Eve much more frequently than they do, say, Ruth or Esther. But coming back to the storytelling, which I think is the main, the crux of the entire conversation as well, Utkarsh, because in the process of writing this book, did you find that silencing in mythology mirrors how silent women are silenced in contemporary life, at home, at workplaces, or public spaces? And of course, the answer is yes, right?
Yeah.
You've kind of held up a mirror to what's happening in reality, like you just now mentioned. So, if Draupadi could speak directly to today's generation of women and men, what do you think she would say?
Well, you need to give me at least 3 hours for that answer, because my Draupadi would speak one hell of a lot. But we won't take that kind of time. First and foremost, I think she would express very clearly her decision that she would not marry 5 men. Just because a mother carelessly told her sons to share whatever they've got, she's not going to be a part of that sharing. So I think, she would definitely raise an objection to it. She was in love with Arjun. Arjun won her in the contest. She would settle down with Arjun only. She would also want to say and clarify, that the war of Mahabharata did not happen for her supposed laughter at Duryodhan. This is a very common
Right.
refrain we hear, that if only she had
Yeah.
not laughed. No, the war would have happened, because the war did not happen because of Draupadi's laughter. It happened because of greed,
Read.
vices, and hatred of men for people and for people in power who did not exercise their power when they had to or when they should have. Right? It happened because of the follies of men. That's why it happened. It had nothing to do. She's a soft target, so you can
Yes.
always say that yeah, she laughed and thus that is why it happened.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
finally, to cut short the 3 hours, when she was dragged to the court, before she was molested,
Yes.
she would not, she is supposed to have asked Yudhishthir, a question, or she's supposed to have asked the Sabha a question that who did Yudhishthir stake first, she or him? Well, Draupadi, if given a chance, would not ask that question. She would ask, "How dare Yudhishthir stake a woman on a gambling this thing? What
In a
right
game.
does
Yeah.
he have to stake a wife? And what right does he have to stake anybody else's wife? Because she was also the wife of four other people." So
Right.
I think those are the basic questions that she would definitely ask, and she would definitely say. So yes, that's a summary of what she
Yes.
would ask. At least the key points there.
Thank you. Yes. Just moving a little, moving the conversation a little into, segueing into another section where we're talking a little bit about how religion, tradition, and power structures look like. Also then moving away just from Draupadi and looking at the world at large today and, having a slightly zoomed out perspective. So religion and tradition have often been used, I believe, to justify the marginalization of women. In your view, how do we reconcile faith with equality and justice?
I absolutely agree that both religion and tradition has been used to justify is the word, for marginalization of women, and it's applicable to all religions. So there's nothing specific about any particular religion. And one must understand that while it did happen at a time for a purpose, whatever be that purpose, that's not important anymore. One has to move on and not perpetuate it. See, if a practice had its rationale at one point or time, however distorted it be, if it made sense, if it does not make sense in modern times, then you simply have to kind of leave it by the wayside. You'll simply have to learn to ignore it. It cannot be held in esteem just because it appeared relevant in the past, right? Justice for all and equality are the bedrock of modern civilization and modern times. If something is coming in the way of both, and I'm very clear, both in terms of equality and justice, then one needs to relook at it. One needs to make a call. Let's not hold on to something which has lost its relevance, if it at all had any relevance. So, if the times have changed and practices need to be changed, practices need to be relooked at it, let's not keep patting our back by saying, here is a community, here is a set of people who are holding on to the ancient traditions. If the ancient traditions have lost their meaning, if the ancient traditions do not make any rational sense today, then in the name of holding on to traditions, there is simply no justification of holding on to it. So if women were marginalized, okay, for whatever be the reasons, then it's time to stop that. It's time to, sort of overlook whatever logic they had at that point of time.
While that seems to be the perfect answer, it sounds very euphemistic, Utkarsh, if I might say so, because what I have seen in my personal observation, I think even traditions and customs and religious rituals, we are more comfortable aligning to them when it is comfortable, for us, as in the patriarchal out uh, patriarchal viewpoint. But if it is a little uncomfortable there, then we are ready to change. You know, there are so many customs, so many religious customs, so many religious, sentiments that have been attached to something that may have been relevant at that point of time when it was instituted or when it became a part of, what people were following, whether it's religiously or politically or whichever way. We know that it is time to change, but how often do we see change actually happening? How often do we encounter the willingness to change, especially this part, the marginalization of women, and to say, no, we are willing to look at equality, or forget about equality, to be treated with respect, to start there, and for me, that's the most important premise, to start at just being treated with respect.
No, I
Yes.
completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. It's not easy because it's not, what is not easy is the change. We are not never comfortable with change. Status quo is all that everybody wants, right? Also, the tools used at earlier stage was very, very effective in controlling. Please remember that all these terms, all these so-called traditions and beliefs, they were there to control a segment.
Right.
And if it paid rich dividends then, the expectation is it will pay rich dividends even now. So the aspect of control is important here. And that's what people want to do. And that is why they are not willing to institute a change. But the change has to come. If it and let's start at home. I'm just saying that don't look at the society to change overnight for us. Are we making those changes at home? If that's where the change has to begin. So yes, it's not going to be easy. A practice which has been followed through generations and centuries cannot be overlooked. Either an enforcement by force, whichever way you have to do it, it has to happen. And we like it or not, the change has to be instituted, and sooner than later, because I think it's quite late already, if you ask me.
Right. Having said that, change, I mean, we recognize the importance of the fact that change must happen. And I know that in your book, because you've been quite vocal, about the fact that, and I love the fact that you've mentioned this in your book, that, the political leaders had control over maybe the economics and the political aspects of people, whom they were ruling. It could be kings, or it could be people with power. Whereas it was the religious leaders who, kind of lay down a framework for what people must think, how they should behave, what are some of the, forms of behavior that were almost institutionalized, to say that this is how it should be, and this is the way, this is the way things are to be looked at, and things are to be, followed, without any question. And I like the fact that you also in your book brought out, the possibility of how religious leaders may have silenced some of the really strong women-centric parts of those epics, or the scriptures, in their narration, in their oral tradition of being passed on from generation to generation. It's now that people are actually reading things. We have
Right.
access to, reading it by ourselves. But for centuries and for generations, it has been the oral tradition, right? So I like that it is a very bold statement that you made in your book. So do you face pushback or criticism from traditionalists for re-examining the sacred stories? And if you do, how do you navigate that?
Well, that's, I don't know how to answer. Yes, at every step, we feel there's a pushback. And as long as you're singing praises of the past, you're a nice guy. If you're questioning something, a practice, you're not a nice guy. Yes, I get trolled very badly. I get some really dirty emails which tell me who the hell do you think you are, etc., etc. That's, I think that's part of what happens. So definitely my book is raised some unpalatable questions, and to be very honest, quite a few of the publishers had rejected this book because they felt that, okay, the topic is not very interesting. Now I know where that's coming from, but the objection was not about the silencing of the voice aspect. They were concerned by the segment of the people who were responsible for the silencing and the backlash from there. So I think quite a few people gave some reason or the other, and sort of said no. But that's the book. But even on a day-to-day basis, when I teach or when I'm taking lectures at places, there are people who stand up and have an objection by saying, Why are you talking about this? Why are you highlighting this aspect? Why aren't you highlighting something else? Now, a critical appreciation or a critical outlook to any text will have to have, a kind of a critical outlook to the whole thing, not
Right,
just a selective thing. So, if
right,
I'm going to talk about an epic and if I'm going to critically analyze the epic, which is what one is supposed to do, then I cannot overlook something just because a segment is uncomfortable. But
unhappy. Yeah.
yes, these days people do speak up and say that you're only highlighting this, talk about this. So there are students who will walk up and say, so why don't you talk about this and not that? So that's the change of time where students tell teachers what to teach and how to teach. I think we're undergoing a bad time for people who are dealing in this. And how do I navigate? Well, that's something an experience every time one faces this kind of a backlash. But over a period of time, I've learned one thing is that you don't bang your head against a wall. So save your head, the wall won't break.
Yes. Well, that's interesting because I also wanted to ask whether you have basis all the feedback that you've received or the backlash that you may have received, whether you have had a sequel to Silencing Draupadi, or whether you're looking at writing something else that will support what you're saying in Silencing Draupadi, which is a very bold book. I mean, for someone like me reading it, I was quite taken aback with how bold you were in straightforwardly in the story, bringing out the fact that the guru had in fact hidden from the Sishya some of those scriptures which actually talked about the fact that Draupadi had a voice and that she used it, not just in the places which were convenient, where it was conveniently mentioned, but also in the inconvenient places, in the epic. So, do you think that, by revisiting these myths, um, it could be a form of us reclaiming history? I mean, not to reject faith, but to humanize it.
Yes, I think, see, revisiting myths over a period of time is an absolute must. And it's not that we are doing, not that I'm doing it or others are doing it. It has been done time and again. And it is also necessary to do to sort of bring out what the original author was taking. Let me take a small example here. All of us know the character Shakuntala, right? Now, Shakuntala, in her original form, which is a character from Mahabharata, right? She's Vyasa's first character from Mahabharata, and true to all the Mahabharata females, she was an extremely strong, fiery, individualistic, bold kind of a woman who took her own decisions, right? The poetic genius of Kalidas transformed that character into a damsel in distress, giving birth to the classic Abhigyan Shakuntala, which got famous the world over, right? I mean, people in Europe translated it in numerous languages, but what they translated was Kalidas's version of Abhigyan Shakuntala, and there is no doubt about it that it's one of the most beautiful classic literature. But while Shakuntala of the play ended up being more famous than Vyasa's original Shakuntala, it's still important that somebody and that people know how Vyas had portrayed that character. And
Right.
that is important. And that is why we say that it's important to revisit. What if the bard decided to change a character's personality? Shouldn't you know how the original character was perceived or conceived? And that is why it's very, very important that you relook at it. Over a period of time, as time passes, the outlook, the rationality, the values undergo a change. And that change is visible. See, when we read the numerous versions of Ramayana, people say there are so many versions of Ramayana. If you just read every Ramayana, in whichever language it is, based on which century it was written, you will see how the society has changed, how the transition of the society is visible in these different versions.
In the
So, yes,
narrative.
revisiting is extremely important. Relooking at it, reinterpreting a story is critical. And that is exactly how stories stay alive and relevant. If you're going to bundle it in a small box and wrap it up in a cloth and tie it in a string and say, touch me not, you're just killing the story. So it's
Right.
important that you revisit, relook, reimagine, reinterpret. Absolutely critical for the development and for the sustenance of that story.
Right. Right. Again, going back very, very briefly to silencing Draupadi, the title of your book, I mean, obviously it's so evocative, when you're saying silencing Draupadi. Um, I know that we've also spoken about how that silence takes so many forms in society today. And we've spoken about why maybe the men at that point of time around Draupadi didn't say anything either. So, taking that, just linking that to what we're doing today in today's conversation, and also talking about how important it is for men to be able to support the voice that we need to see women have. How do you think men, as listeners and allies, begin to create more spaces for women's voices in both personal and public life?
See, first and foremost, let's accept. First and foremost comes from acceptance. Acceptance that there was nothing absolutely given about the privilege that was handed over to men on a platter, right? You didn't just get it because you deserved it, right? You just got it because you snatched it. You just got it because you decided to steal it. So and remember, every privilege that the men had in the society came at a price, except that price was paid by the
Well,
woman and not them, so that is important also. Just as we as individuals, one can always say, and I can say, let's say my generation or a few generations, say, I didn't do it. Oh, well, I didn't unleash this atrocity, so why blame me? Well, no, you didn't. I completely agree. But we were the beneficiaries of that privilege which the ancestors got, right? And we are still enjoying those privileges. So it's imperative on men, on people, on men today to make that corrections however you can. Begin at home, like I mentioned. Start at organizations, right? Look at public spaces. Look at equality at home. Look at equality in your organization. Look at equality in your vicinity. Don't make it like we are giving it as a favor. Oh, I'm a great guy because I'm doing a favor to this woman, right? No, that's not how it is. That's something that you'll have to look at. And as authors, tell the story the way it is meant to be, and not with the same objectives that the ancient bards had when they
yeah.
were telling a story. They were trying to make a social charter. You don't have to do that. So call a spade, and make way for the efficiency and recognize the women's talent and skill when you come across, and bring up the true element of a woman if she is a hero. Don't just talk about motherhood and sacrifice and those same topics that have been highlighted to eulogize the woman when she sacrifices, and when she lays down her life for the children, for the family. It's over. We now need to look at stories which talk about true heroism of women. And again, very important, which we kind of classically make a mistake, is the heroism of a man and the heroism of a woman are not same.
Not the
If a
same.
man is fighting a dragon and killing a dragon and he's brave, the woman cannot be considered brave if she also has to kill a dragon. No, the woman's bravery can be in a different way. So
And it
change the
should
parameter.
be. Yes,
Right.
yes.
Change those parameters and judge a woman for her heroic acts. She doesn't don't compare with the same benchmark of men, that they've also fought battles, they also killed dragons, they also did horse riding. No, not necessarily. I think
That's right.
these kind of changes are kind of critical.
So you actually, very beautifully laid the foundation for my next question, which is, do you see a shift in how younger generations, especially women writers, are reclaiming these stories and rewriting mythic female power?
Well, yes, it's interesting to see many women authors expressing themselves so openly and frankly, and let me add the word truthfully. So more and more women are expressing, their takes on the myths. They are highlighting it. They're bringing up in the open. They're talking about. In short, what is happening is that slowly that androcentric gaze is falling off.
Right.
When we are talking about a perspective where we are seeing the world through the eyes of the female. I must mention here that two very, very interesting and strong authors that I've come across is Natalie Haynes and Rebecca Solnit. These two people, women, have done some tremendous amount of work on revisiting and reinterpreting myths. And Madeline Miller. When you read these authors, you realize the amount of work. And mind you, these are researched work. These are not just storytellers. They are people, especially Natalie Haynes and Rebecca. These are people who've done some tremendous amount of research and come up with some classic texts, which are worth reading. And they open up, a vision. It's not just fiction. All of us are good storytellers. Some are better, some are not so good. But it's not just the storytelling. It's highlighting something that, because the story was not told in a particular manner, you missed it. These are authors who are doing a wonderful job, and I would recommend everybody who's listening to this, do look up Natalie Haynes and Rebecca Solnit and Madeline Miller, etc.
Thank you so much for bringing up those names as well. And right here we have a question from one of our viewers right now, Sharon Rajesh Titus. The question is, what is your take on movies in the recent times adapting to such mythological stories? Like, for example, the movie Loka speaks of Kerala folklore, the legend of Kalyankattu Neeli. What about those narratives?
Well, some of the work that people have done, like I must mention here, Kantara or Loka. Yes, some of the work are good because they're highlighting some very interesting folklore, some very interesting aspects of an ancient belief system.
Right.
But overall, I am not very, comfortable with the representation of mythical stories or mythology in films, both in India and abroad. I mean, so much of liberty is taken that it becomes a very different narrative altogether. But yes, some work, like I did mention, Loka or even Kantara, etc., have done a good job of highlighting. But again, what happens is that the story doesn't come out. Like, for example, the story of Panjurli, for example, is not really brought out in a context. But yes, definitely the depiction. And more importantly, thanks to that depiction, people went and read about it. People went and discussed about it. I still remember, after Kantara release, so many people got interested, and we had a separate session in the classroom talking about, these whole performance or rituals that are surrounding it. So yes, but in general, no, not very optimistic or not very positive about the filmy representation of myths and folklore. Folklore, yes. Myths, no.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for answering that question. Also, again, like moving into maybe just the final section of what I was envisaging our conversation to be like. So, from your perspective, like what does it take to create cultural change? Not just in policy or education, but mostly in the imagination, which is where storytelling starts, and in the imagination, which is where faith also resides, right? I mean, because we are so rooted in what we are imagining.
This is a tough one. I'll be honest with you that these changes are something that the society has to come up from within. You just can't have something that is that is so deep rooted over centuries and over generations, and people clinging on to it. To let go so easily doesn't happen so easily. It's going to take a lot of time, but it has to come from within. It has to come from a segment which is willing to hold a mirror to itself. Until and unless you are willing to say that, yes, I think this was wrong, you will not make that correction. And often, and especially in modern times, we are not willing to see anything wrong about our past. We are holding on to it like, as if that's the only straw we have to continue in life, to say that everything in my past was good, everything of my past was bad, great. Nothing, no comments, no criticism. If you're going to do that, there's going to be no change. We'll keep going back to Stone Age. So yes, the first and foremost is you have to accept that yes, there have been errors, there have been mistakes, and they are important to be highlighted, because if you're not highlighting them and if you're not accepting them, you're bound to make the same mistakes again. It's just that the shape will be different, but yes, the mistakes will still be there. So yes, we need a lot of, I would say, introspection to say where did we go wrong and how can we make the change. And I think authors, social commentators have a great task on their hand to talk exactly the way it is rather than window dress it and create texts just eulogizing the past. There is good things about the past. I'm not saying that everything of the past is
Right.
not good, but do talk about what was wrong because the wrongs need correcting.
That's a very valid point that you brought up, Utkarsh. But I also wanted to, go back to one point in what you said earlier on about like the storytelling, like who tells the story and why does it matter so much? It's obviously because the storyteller has the power to influence the way perceptions are created or perpetrated as well. So, in your role, and you have a very very critical role right now, being a professor in the University of Mumbai, and also as you mentioned earlier on that you're also teaching in other universities, other colleges, and you have a very eclectic group of youngsters and people who have the power to create change. Do you have maybe classes, or do you foresee opportunities where you're training women to start doing the storytelling, especially because the power that storytelling has, and the yeah, yes, please go on.
Like I think this is something I mentioned to you yesterday or whenever we had a conversation, and I said that wherever I teach and whichever audience I'm addressing, one common thing is that 70% of the audience are women,
Women.
right? And let's face it, they are the ones who can who can make a huge change in terms of either storytellers, because often in primary schools you'll find teachers are women, mothers, young sisters. They make a huge change and an impact on people. So yes, definitely, I think women have a great opportunity to tell the stories. And look at the mythological genre. Look at the mythological genre. There are so many women storytellers, and some of them are doing a fabulous job in the country and outside. They're doing a great job. They're writing great texts. They're highlighting things which are now being accepted, and nobody's getting scandalized by what they are saying. So yes, there is a change, and as I said, the storytellers have a huge responsibility to
Right.
bring out the right text and the right narratives and talk about the right kind of a story. And yes, a lot of work is happening, and I'm really hopeful that changes, well, not round the corner, but not very far either.
Absolutely. I want to be hopeful about it as well. And I know that we are in the final minutes of our conversation, but I just wanted to ask you also, if you could leave our listeners with one thought or call to action, what would it be?
Oh, well, I would just say read and understand. Don't just follow the usual that has been handed over to you by, uh, people. Learn and accept a counterpoint, and accept the fact that what you have known as a popular version or versions need not be correct. There is always another side of a coin, and don't get stuck to what you know, to know what your version is. And if that's a very good version, it need not be the right version. I would only say read and read, and then form an opinion, and most importantly, read from the correct source, right?
Right.
I mean, don't learn from WhatsApp and social media reels and fly by night scholars, where there are many today on social media. And do not hesitate to question, and don't hate people who question. Very important. Don't hate them if they question. It's very important. Remember, if everybody followed what was already told to them, we wouldn't be sitting on so many inventions and discoveries. It's the questioning which sets off the motion of change. So it is important that those who are questioning, allow them to question. Try and get an answer. If you don't, seek out these answers. And again, at the end of it, read and read as much literature as you can. Don't just get stuck to what you know. I mean, and I have come across so many people who say, I have read only one text and that's good enough for me. No, it's not good enough for you. It's
Right.
not. You need to read more.
Thank you, Utkarsh. And what are you planning on doing next? Like, are there any upcoming projects or themes that you're exploring? Could you share something with us?
Well, nothing concrete at the moment, but I'm working on a book of short stories
Okay.
about conversations between people which they've never had. But if they had a conversation of this nature, what would they say
Is
in
it
this conversation?
is
But it's
it
pure.
linked to your
Yeah,
mythological?
mythology. I
Okay.
don't think I know anything other than mythology and folklore at this ripe age of mine. So
That's
I'm
very
happy with
interesting.
that.
Yes, yes. So yes, and how can our listeners continue to engage with your work or with your conversation?
So I'm there on social media. I'm not very active, but yes, I'm there on social media, like especially Facebook and Instagram. Please connect
Right.
with me on Facebook and Instagram. I keep promoting my ideas, my books, my events in and around the country. Wherever I am, I announce them there. So yes, keep in touch with me through the social media, Instagram and Facebook. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. And yes, we'll also, try to post it on our own channel as well, so that in case
Sure.
people would like to continue, interacting with you, they can do so. So for all those who have joined us on this conversation, that was Utkarsh Patel, author of Silencing Draupadi. As I sit with this conversation, I'm struck by how stories, and especially our oldest ones, continue to hold up a mirror to us. The silencing of Draupadi isn't just from a bygone epic. As we've discussed, it echoes in the boardrooms where women are interrupted, in the temples where they're excluded, and in the everyday spaces where their voices are still waiting to be heard. So perhaps, as Utkarsh reminds us, reclaiming those voices isn't only about rewriting mythology, it's about rewriting how we listen, how we include, and also how we remember. So if you'd like to read Silencing Draupadi or explore more of Utkarsh's work, as he said, you'll find the links in our show notes. And as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, for bringing your presence, your questions, and your openness to our conversations. Until next time, this is Prashanti Mikaela, reminding you that every silence carries a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Thank you so much. Thank you once again, Utkarsh, for having been part of our conversation.
Thank you, Prashanti. That was quite a meaningful conversation I've had, and I've really enjoyed, this discussion. And I really look forward to people engaging. If you have questions, feel free, discuss, we'll talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much once again.